you acted with Jose Ferrer in Cyrano, and I was always struck by the fact that you loved his performance, but you thought the guy really overdid his death scene. He sort of was trying to he had so much emotion, he didn't leave any, you said, for the audience.
Yes.
So I wonder if that was ever in the back of your mind, playing a dying man who didn't acknowledge that he was dying.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about Joe was he was so marvelous as Cyrano, really, generally speaking, until he died. And then he got terribly sentimental. Maybe it was I don't know if it was just Puerto Rican or Spanish kind of thing to do, but he really started crying at his own death. and I learned a lot. I said, no, that's not right. Because, come on, we've got to cry, not you, baby. And if he played against it, we would have been touched to death. So I learned an awful lot about that. And when later on, when I had the fortune to play Cyrano de Bergerac myself, I held that in mind. I said, come on, that's the happiest death that a man can have. He dies ecstatic. He doesn't die sorry for himself.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about your early influences. I know you were born in Ontario and raised by a single mother in Quebec, in Montreal.
In Montreal, yeah.
Yeah, and you originally wanted to be a pianist, correct?
Yes.
But at some point you decided you could, I don't know, meet more girls by acting, or...
Well, no, not really, because I play the piano at parties a lot, and I got a lot of girls. No, it wasn't. I just found it to be rather tough, and I guess I thought, wait a minute, to be a concert pianist, it's a pretty lonely life. I mean, you travel around the world, and you don't have time to meet a lot of people, and you don't. So I opted for the acting, which was much more gregarious and friendly, because your contact all the time is other people. You're not sitting at an instrument looking away from the audience. The audience is your partner. And so I also, it was not quite as hard work, because I was quite good at mimicry in those days, which is disaster, of course, but it made it easier to fall into the acting.
Was your voice, which is now considered one of the stage and screen's great treasures, what it was then, or did you train it?
Oh, I tried to emulate long before I trained, because I'd seen a lot of marvelous actors when I was very young. I mean, extraordinary old Shakespearean war horses like Donald Wolfett and Ralph Richardson and all that gang. That's why I wanted to imitate all those guys, you know, when it came to doing the classics.
They came through Canada? They toured?
Yes,
I know
yes.
Wolfett went around the world.
Montreal had a huge, they imported an awful lot. The old Vic came to Montreal. I saw Rachmaninoff play the piano when I was 13, 14. Can you imagine how lucky I was to? The most extraordinary, great people came through that town.
And tell them who shoved you off the piano bench in high school.
That was not Rachmaninoff. that was Oscar Peterson, who was my school chum. He went to the same school I did. And in Montreal High, the school band consisted of Oscar on piano and Maynard Ferguson on trumpet. Jesus, we had some school band, and there were a couple other. The drummer, I can't remember, but he obviously was a star. And we were fortunate with that little band, I tell you. Oscar was paying his way through school by playing the piano at nightclubs during the intermission between the famous acts, and he would be the intermission pianist to kind of warm up the audience. And then, of course, what the audience did was they didn't listen to the famous acts. They waited for intermission to listen to Oscar, who was astounding and riveting. And he drew a huge crowd. Nobody left the room.
You were adopted almost instantly by all these amazing actors who would take you, would help you get parts, and then take you out and get smashed every night. And you were fully immersed in this kind of wild, obviously very creative, also somewhat self-destructive lifestyle. Do you want to say anything about that? Either warnings or exhortations?
Oh, it was glorious. I mean, the 50s, everybody was so sort of kind of naughty in the 50s. It was so fun to be naughty. And everybody drank much too much. Drugs hadn't really come into it yet. The drugs came on later. And they were pretty, for the most part, incommunicative. But drink was, we were all happy drunks. There was no problem drinking. It was part of life. We couldn't wait for midnight to come along and where life began. Life began at midnight. And I remember doing a play with Jason, my friend Jason Robards Jr. was my best friend. And we were doing plays together on Broadway. And during the play, he would sort of say under his breath, "Where are we starting tonight?" And then you'd say a line of dialogue. I said, "When we start at P.J. Clark's and work our way down to the White Horse." So we planned the whole evening while we're still playing. It was so much more important than the later stuff at night. It's what we really lived for.
You know, Lee Strasberg never figured out the secret of being in the moment. That is being truly in the moment.
Lee Strasberg, whom I met, and needed a drink very bad.
You were at this extraordinary time, too, of live television plays. This extraordinary series of sort of repertory, national repertory company in a way. All these wonderful New York actors coming in and doing these live. Do you remember that experience?
Yes, I sure do. I mean, there were things like, in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn studios, they were doing westerns using New York actors. I mean, can you give me somebody? I mean, look, I'm in a western. So, it didn't work. There was one show that was done in one of those huge studios one night when Lee Marvin got on his horse and by mistake charged right through a papier-mâché mountain. Made a hole in it, and the horse was so terrified it crapped right on camera. Things that happen in live shows.
Didn't you get lost one time?
What?
You got lost in it?
Yeah, I was playing the Archduke Rudolph of Austria, who was, had the famous love affair with Maria Becerra, and they had a little date at a little sort of summer palace where they had their private trysts, and then they committed suicide together. The love. Well, I'm playing Rudolph and with all my medals on, and I'm on my way to see Maria Becerra, played by the beautiful Vivica Lindfors, who was absolutely beautiful, and I couldn't. The set was so dark, I couldn't find my way. I didn't know where to go to get into. And there was an awful pause. I was running around backstage. And there was nobody. There wasn't a floor manager. We used to call them floor managers. The guys, stage managers. There was no one around to point me the way. And of course, by this time, Vivica must have been pacing up and down. She'd run out of dialogue. I mean, she must have been unbelievably furious and nervous. Finally, I saw a little light at the end of the kind of corridor I was in. I made for it, and it was very low, so I pushed my head through, and I came with all my medals on and all. I'd come through the fireplace. But I was and Vivica very steelily looked at me. I thought, well, the suicide will be hurried up now. And at the end, the goddamn producer, I think it was Marty Manulis, who was a famous producer at the time, he had sort of one walled eye. He had a wall eye, actually, so you never knew who he was looking at, or who he was giving shit to. And he looked at me in sort of this kind of half way that he had, and he said, he almost exploded. He got red in the face. He said, "Came through the fucking fireplace." I said, "Yes, and you're fucking lucky I did."